Hello my darlings, it's me again in my reading room. I've got a couple of things I just wanted to mention to you this week. Looking at this book again, I was thinking about a couple of pages. One of them says, remember this page here? What do you want to be when you grow up? Well, I remember being asked that a lot when I was a child. My parents' friends were often asking, oh, what do you want to be when you grow up? But right from when I was 5 years old, I used to say I want to be a nurse. And I expect that's because I'd been in hospital an awful lot as a child. And I thought nurses were wonderful. They always made me feel safe and better. So I thought I'd like to be a nurse. And there's another page in the book which has something to do with it. And it's here. This one with the boy and the mole sitting on the branch of the tree, having a think and a chat. And it says, most of the old moles I know wish they had listened less to their fears and more to their dreams. Sounds a bit odd, doesn't it? Well, we all have dreams, and I don't just mean dreams when you're sleeping at night and you might dream of going for a picnic or riding a horse or going on a holiday, that sort of thing. But we have thoughts which are a sort of dream about what we might like to do or be. And as I say, when I was a little girl, I wanted to be a nurse, and I went on when I was 18 years old to go to a hospital to train to be a nurse. And it's another story, but I didn't finish my training, so I'll tell you about that another time. But something that you might see if you have a newspaper, and particularly today, if you have the Sunday Times, which I know Sarah has, you will find this picture in the paper today. And you might know that this is Florence Nightingale. And you might already know a bit about Florence Nightingale. She was also known as the Lady with the Lamp. And I'm going to tell you a bit more about her shortly. But one of the things that we think about sometimes when we're at school, people talk about, oh, well, you need to be able to do these things so that when you grow up, you can have a good job. Well, that's true to some extent, but we're all able to do things. Some of us are good at what we call academic subjects, like maths and English, history, science. And some of us find those things difficult, but we're really good at sporty things and art things and completely different things. And they're all so important, just as important. So I had to think about some of the things that people might end up doing when they're grown up. So there might be a scientist. Now, we've got a history of having some very famous scientists from the UK and from America too. They discover all sorts of things. You might fancy being a magician, fashion designer, an artist, an author or writer. Now, I'd like to write a book. I also love all things to do with art, but I'm not very good at it. Firefighter, policeman, doctor, nurse, athlete. I'm sure you can name some really famous athletes. Footballer. I can think of several of you who might fancy being a footballer. And I think Chris would like to have been a footballer. Singer, dancer, actor, musician. Now, lots of you are really good at those things and you love dancing, singing, music. You might fancy being an astronaut. Or you might work in a factory. You might be a gamer or a games designer. You might be a pharmacist. You might be a hairdresser, beauty therapist. You might work in business. Businessmen and women do amazing things. You might be a film director, cameraman, zookeeper, soldier, a pilot, ship's captain, teacher, engineer, plumber, electrician, a journalist, a ballerina. Oh, now I really do love dancing, and I did do ballet as a child. I would love to have been a ballet dancer. Social worker, a lawyer, an accountant, or if you like cooking, you might be a chef. Now, as I say, I always wanted to be a nurse, and I knew that from when I was very little. But actually, I would like to have done other things as well, things that I enjoyed. And I also wanted to be a mummy. I really wanted to have a home and children. And I had another dream. I always wanted to have a house where I could have lots of children to live who perhaps didn't have mummies and daddies. And there are lots of children whose mummies and daddies, sadly, die in wars, all sorts of things. And I just always dreamt I would have a house for people who didn't have a home. But that was just another thing that I used to think about a lot. So you can have lots of different dreams. Now, my father was an accountant, so that's somebody who looks after companies' money, or it deals with banks and all sorts of stuff like that that I don't really understand a great deal about. So he was an accountant, and he worked in several different businesses. But he also loved music, and he was a very gifted musician. He played trumpet and piano, and he did have a band, a jazz band. Jazz is a certain type of music. He also loved sports, so he played cricket and rugby when he was a younger man, and he just loved trying lots of different things. But I have to tell you, he was absolutely hopeless at DIY. He put up shelves in our garage when I was a very little girl, and overnight the car was parked in the garage, and in the middle of the night there was an almighty crash, and the shelves had fallen down on the bonnet of the car, and the shelves were loaded with cans of paint and all sorts of other stuff that you keep in the garage, and of course they caused damage to the bonnet of the car. So B, my mummy, didn't ever let my daddy do those sort of jobs again. So they needed people like plumbers and decorators and builders to do all sorts of jobs that were needed around the house. And we all have need to use people for all sorts of different things that we can't necessarily do. Now, one of the other things that's in the Sunday Times newspaper today is the rich list. Now, this is full of names of men and women who are so wealthy. They have made millions and millions, and sometimes billions of pounds or dollars of money. And they do all sorts of different things. Now, let me tell you, you will know some of these names, and I've just picked out a few. Now, I know you will all know J.K. Rowling, who wrote all the Harry Potter books. But she didn't start as a writer. She actually was a teacher. And she just started writing from her flat at home. You may have heard about that. And of course, she has made millions and millions of pounds. Gareth Bale, Harry Kane. What about Lewis Hamilton? Now, Lewis Hamilton, he definitely dreamt of being a Formula One driver when he was young. But he didn't just start off in Formula One. As a little boy, he started off driving carts. And he just, now I don't mean shopping carts like you have in the US. I mean sort of, well, Tim and Nick and Chris can show you pictures of carts. And Huey, you've been in a cart. So Lewis Hamilton started by training and growing in his ability to drive, but he always dreamt of being a champion. And of course, he became champion. Now, also in this list of people who've made millions and millions and billions is Mel Morris. Now, Mel Morris is someone who designs games, or is he a gamer? No, he designs games. Simon, now what's his name, who does the X Factor? Simon Cowell. Now, what about James Dyson? I wonder, have you got a Dyson vacuum cleaner? I have. Now, James Dyson is an engineer, and he dreamt about designing a different type of motor for a vacuum cleaner. And of course, his vacuum cleaners are just amazing. And he made millions of pounds, dollars from his vacuum cleaners. And also he designed an electric car. So he's done lots of things. But I want to tell you about this lady, Florence Nightingale, because she was born 200 years ago this year. She was born in 1820. Now, she was actually born to a very, very rich family, and they lived in a beautiful, stately home. Now, I expect you've been to visit some stately homes. Maybe if you've been to Longleat Safari Park, you will have seen the house there, Longleat House. That belongs to the Marquis of Bath. And he's a very rich man too. And that's a stately home. And there are lots of beautiful, beautiful stately homes in this country that you can visit. And Florence actually came from a family who had a beautiful, beautiful home. And she was born in the city of Florence, which is in Italy. And I have to say, it's one of my most favourite cities. It's full of lots of amazing art, both paintings and statues, some of the most famous ones in the world, actually. It's a very beautiful city. You might get to go there when you're older. And Florence, as a young lady, felt that she wanted to go out to an area called the Crimea. And there was a war going on in Crimea. Terrible, terrible war. And many, many thousands and thousands of soldiers were killed, but also there were thousands and thousands and thousands injured, badly injured. And she went out to help look after them. And she was actually the very first person that we would call a nurse as we know nurses to be. Before that, people who were nurses really were people who they would often drink too much, they didn't care about anything, and they would just, it wasn't a nice job to have. And actually, Florence Nightingale, when she went out to the Crimea, was absolutely horrified to see the circumstances that these poor wounded soldiers were in. Everything around them was filthy and disorganised. And she started by getting other young women to join her. And she started what we know now is so very important, and that is hand washing. She realised that to help these men keep well and not get lots of infections, they needed to be clean. The patients needed to be kept clean, but the nurses, the people looking after them, needed to be clean. They needed to wash their hands all the time. And not just their hands, but under their nails and their wrists. And that's just the way we're being told to wash our hands now, to keep free of the virus. And Florence started doing that with all her nurses. Every time they went to a patient, before they went to another patient, they would wash their hands. They would keep the patients clean. They would keep their sheets and blankets clean because they didn't have duvets like we have. So they'd be taking off the sheets and blankets every day. And you know, they didn't have washing machines. So the nurses had to wash all those sheets and blankets by hand. It was a really, really difficult job. And they didn't have electricity. So that's why Florence Nightingale was known as the lady with the lamp, because she walked around holding an oil lamp, because that's all they had then. And many, many thousands of men survived their terrible injuries, and they did begin to recover, because Florence's ways of keeping everybody clean was preventing or stopping these men getting infections. And now, they didn't have antibiotics like we do now. And you know, often if you have an infection and it's caused by bacteria, not by a virus, but by bacteria, you can have antibiotics, which will hopefully kill off the bacteria and you will get better. But they didn't have those then, in those days. So Florence Nightingale worked so hard to train nurses to be clean and hygienic. And they had to wash the hospital floors. They had to do everything to keep clean around sick people. Well, she came back to this country and she wanted to start investigations, and she started on at the government of the day back in the 1800s, saying about her new regime, that means her new rules for hygiene. And she was not popular, but she persevered. That means she kept working at it, and she started a training school for nurses, the very first training school for nurses. And it was actually at St Thomas's Hospital in London. Now, you might have heard of St Thomas's Hospital recently, because Boris Johnson, our Prime Minister, was a patient there when he had coronavirus, and he was looked after by doctors and nurses. Many of those nurses will have trained in that hospital. And if you train as a nurse in St Thomas's Hospital, you are called a Nightingale nurse. And you can call yourself a Nightingale nurse for the rest of your life, and it's a very special thing to be. And when you complete your exams, your training, you're given a badge to wear on your uniform. And it's a Nightingale badge in memory of Florence Nightingale. And you become a Nightingale nurse. And you can actually go to work anywhere in the world, and Nightingale nurses are well known and respected. Now, the thing about Florence Nightingale was that she could have been a very, very wealthy or rich lady. But she chose to give all that up for what she believed in. Now, she was actually a lady who was a Christian, and she believed that God had given her this important vocation, we call it, or a special calling on her life. So she gave up everything that she could have had that would have made her life very comfortable and pleasant to be a nurse and to help other people. She became very ill herself when she was an older person, and she had an illness called brucellosis when she was younger, but she recovered from that. When she was a very old lady, she had an illness that actually she didn't recover from, and that illness was called ME. But they didn't call it that then. It's only been in recent years that researchers have discovered that that's what Florence Nightingale most likely had. So she didn't ever get to be in any rich list, but what she did has been remembered for 200 years and will go on being remembered. Now, some of these famous people, you will know their names, and they will be remembered, probably a lot of them, for what they have done, what they have created, what they have invented, or what they have done as sportsmen or artists, company directors, all those sorts of things. And it's wonderful that they have made a great deal of money. But of course, making money isn't what makes us important or valued people. It's great to make money because you can use it to help so many other people. You might create jobs for other people because of what you do or what you've invented. You might give pleasure to millions of people around the world, particularly if you're in a band or a footballer or a famous actress. And a lot of famous and wealthy people do use their money to help other people. And some of them just do it quietly so that nobody actually knows. You don't have to let everybody know if you do things to help. So, when you're thinking about what you might want to do or be when you're older, try not to let your fears stop you from living your dream. Now, by fears, I mean the things that you might be afraid of to do with your dreams. So you might think, like I did, oh, well, I'm not going to be a very good artist, certainly not as good as my sister, and I'm not going to be a ballerina, although I did ballet for many years. Wasn't good enough to be a ballerina, but I did want to have a go at nursing. That was a great dream, and I did have a lovely, lovely family, and you're all part of that lovely, lovely family. And if I can help somebody who doesn't have a home to live in, then I do. But you might be thinking to yourself, well, I'm not sure I'm ever going to be very good at, well, maybe let's say playing the guitar or even running or any number of those things. But you know, it's not just a matter of being famous or making loads of money out of doing those things. It's about enjoying doing those things. Doing the things that you love, that give you pleasure, and often give other people pleasure too. Because I love seeing you all doing different paintings or acting or playing your instruments or playing football. I love seeing the things that you can do. And the things that you can be. You can be kind, gentle, hardworking, thoughtful, just compassionate people. Compassion is all about not just kindness, but thinking about how other people feel, and can you make them feel better? Can you help? Or can you make them feel better about themselves in some way? Don't let anything stop you. Don't let other people say, oh, I don't think you're good enough to do that. Don't worry about what other people think about your paintings, or whether you want to, I don't know, learn to fly an aeroplane, or if you just want to be someone who can arrange flowers beautifully or grow things, anything. Whoops, nearly dropped my book. So that's it for now. I know I've gone on a long time, but perhaps you can just watch it in stages. And remember, I love you all so, so much. And here comes a hug. Love you, my darlings. Bye.